how do you explain your job and what you do to like randoms on the street who don't know?
I do a show called Whose Line Is It Anyway on television, and also live with like Ryan Stiles and Greg Proops and Drew Carey and like all the famous people from the show. And we when we're not doing the TV show taping it, we travel around like to places like the River Rock and do live improvisation. And occasionally, just TV and film and things like that. But mostly, I travel around doing comedy and making things up.
So what's interesting to me, right, is because I should say that I know a little something about your career. This isn't the first time.
That's all there is to know.
That's all there is to know. But you, I would define you to some extent as a professional improviser. Is that a fair?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I spend most of my time on stage improvising. I very rarely do things that are scripted. Unless it's like a TV show or something like that.
Yeah, of course. Unless you have to, unless that's the
But I prefer to improvise because there's less to know.
So the thing with improv comedy is I think to some of the people, some of the muggles, the normals in the audience, they wouldn't necessarily realize the degree of like training and skill that they're necessarily seeing, right? Especially with stand-up comedy, like everyone kind of judges it. Everyone's like, oh, whatever, I could do it. But with improv in particular, and with Whose Line even more in particular, that's like, there's like, it's like seeing an amazing, like the best musicians in the world, only like.
Well, I'm working with the most talented guys in the world. Like Ryan Stiles is like the Babe Ruth of improv, and so I'm working with very, very talented people. And when you tape Whose Line, it's the easiest job in the world because you're surrounded by Colin Mockery and Wayne Brady and Ryan and Aisha Tyler. Like everybody's amazing. So it's quite easy. The trick with improv is to just do it a lot. When you first start, you're terrible at it and you're horrified on stage. Now, I don't get nervous about it anymore. I don't really think of us as doing something very skilled. It's really like there's no difference between us backstage and us on stage. It's just that when we're on stage, we're drinking less. So.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on the venue.
Yeah, it does.
So tell me about a podcast and documentary called Harmontown. How do you describe Harmontown?
For people who know Dan Harmon, the creator of Community, he and I have been best friends for a long time. We actually met through improv. We did a show called Comedy Sports, and I did it in Los Angeles, and he did the Milwaukee chapter of it. And we met, I think, in like '94 or '95. And in Milwaukee for a comedy sports tournament, and it's just a bunch of improv nerds meeting and having like a tournament together. And then he and Rob Schraub moved out to Los Angeles with a comic book called Scud, and the idea of writing TV shows. And so we become friends for since then. And Dan and I do a very strange podcast called Harmontown, where it's basically Dan ranting and raving and me kind of hosting it, and when the frisbee goes over the fence, I keep it back in play. And there was a documentary made about it, about Dan kind of wandering the earth, drinking and self-destructing and not writing scripts.
But a major part of Harmontown is you guys actually playing Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah, we Dan, like in the early days of Harmontown, like I think before we were podcasting it, or maybe I think before we were podcasting it. But I could be wrong. Dan, one time before the show we met, and we didn't tell anybody. Dan said, "I want to play D&D, like in real life, like not like in the show. Like I want to get back into it because we tried. I had never played it when I was young or in school, like high school or college or anything, and Dan had a lot. We tried it as adults, meaning in our late 20s, mid 20s. To play it, and it was terrible because Dan was the dungeon master and he was garbage. He was because he gets too caught up. Also,
you think he'd be really good?
You would think he'd be great at it because like he's into detail and he's a great storyteller. Yeah. But have you ever heard Dan tell a joke? Like Dan can't tell a joke.
Just a joke.
Like guy goes into a bartender, like he cannot tell those because he gets too caught up in what you think about what he's saying.
Yeah.
And a dungeon master needs a certain kind of like strange arrogance about what I say actually goes, whether you agree with it or not. So he said, why don't we use Harmontown to kind of be an American Idol, and every week we'll bring up somebody from the audience, and we'll just do a fake small round of D&D.
Little session,
and then we'll pick the one we like, and then we'll just use that. We'll hire that person, and we'll have big parties, and we'll play D&D, and that'll be our guy or gal. Mm-hmm. So the first night we do that, and we told nobody this. Like this is an hour before the show, And and Dan says, does anybody out there play D&D? And of course, we do it in the back of a comic book store.
Yeah, so it's a good
95%.
It's a good pool to draw from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everybody did. Most people had dice in their pockets. So.
Yeah.
And,
just in case.
And so has anybody here ever been a dungeon master? And this one big hand comes up from a guy with a great beard and a ponytail, and Dan said, "Would you mind coming up on stage?" And the guy's like, "Okay." And he comes up, and this guy's name is Spencer. We'd never met him. He had never come to the show before. Dan said, "You're a dungeon master?" He said, "Yeah." Like really suspicious. And he said, "Well, would you when was the last time you did it?" And Spencer said, "Today. Like that's what I do. I'm a dungeon master." And we're like, and instantly the crowd fell in love with him. And he's never been off the show since then.
Yeah, there was no need to find
We never even bothered looking for anybody else. Spencer is a national treasure. We're all very good friends with him now, and we love and adore him. And he was on tour with us on the Harmontown documentary. But we took him out of. He worked in the back room of an Apple computer store, lived at home with his parents. Now he lives in L.A. He's Dan's assistant. Was on Community. Yeah. He was on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I think.
His whole life.
He is the quintessential archetype for me of what I want a dungeon master to be like. Yeah. And he's wonderful. And we found out later on, he had come to the show that night, and he never leaves Simi Valley where he was from. Mm-hmm. He came to the show, or Moore Park, which is nearby. He told his friends, he goes, "I want to go to Hollywood and see Harmontown, because I feel like Dan and I should play D&D together."
So that's kind of intense.
Yeah, there was a weird serendipity kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
And so now, Spencer is a huge part of our show.
It's fascinating that he's like the Kelly Clarkson of Dungeons and Dragons. He's, American Idol, whatever.
I think he would embrace that. Spencer was my introduction to really playing D&D. And when we first started on Harmontown, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how combat worked or how any of the rules went. Spencer's
in D&D or real life.
Exactly. Yeah. Real life combat.
Okay.
I'm worse at. But Spencer does all the rolling of the dice, and I had a vague idea of what my character was. As it's gone on, we started playing on our own, like a private home game of Pathfinder, which I think is what we were always playing on the Harmontown.
Yes, yeah.
It's
hard to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, also, we were never really playing anything that well. We play a very crappy version of D&D on the show. But Spencer, he does really take it seriously. Now we've moved on to Shadowrun, which I'm really into, because now I kind of know how the rules work, and so I've got the core rule book, and now I've really geeked out on it.
Here is the real kind of crux of why I wanted to talk to you in particular. Okay, it's because Dungeons and Dragons. I'll just lay it out I won't hold back. Okay, I'm just going to really just blast you with this.
Lay it on me, Graham.
It seems like there's a wide overlap, a large overlap. Humongous overlap between the skills you would need to be an improv comedian and to play Dungeons & Dragons effectively. Would you say so, or? I
would say so. However, what I've found when I play D&D, I'm a bad improviser because I'm just learning at it. Yeah. So I think now that I've played a little bit, and we've moved on from D&D and Pathfinder, and now we're playing Shadowrun, and I really read the rule book and really got into it. And the more you know about your character, the better you can play that character. So in improv, you walk out, you pick a character automatically, and you just commit to that and do it. Yeah. So there are no rules. You're just making them up as you go along. I have a thing where I get too caught up in the rules, I'm bogged down of can I do this? What is my, what's
overly
right?
Technical.
What's wrong? Yeah, so I'm overly editing myself while I do it. As I have become more familiar with my character, and now that we've made a new character for our Shadowrun thing, I'm really into it. Yeah. So I find that once I know what my character carries, what my character looks like, what my character is motivated by, what he or she would or would not do, then you can improvise. And also, it depends on who you're playing with. So when you're playing with people that can really improvise, I love playing with Dan Harmon because he and I can really get into the character improv of it. And then when you know what your weapons are, say, and what, I'm a magic user now for the first time, which now I'm a baby at that. So just learning how to cast spells and which spells to use when, that liberates the fun of the improv part of it. But I would agree with you absolutely. Like a huge part of D&D is improv. I've seen people that are not improvisers that would be terrified to go up on stage and do what I do and do comedy improv that are fantastic improvisers in D&D, because that's a world that they're really comfortable in.
Or maybe even like in that case, the technical aspects they can like hold on to, right?
Yeah, if you're an information junkie and a rules person, and you can quiz our game master Spencer on the rule book. He knows everything. He knows stats on all of the monsters and the critters and the spells and everything. Like that's what he's really into. I think I'm into that too, but I'm just learning it. So that is exciting for me to kind of understand the universe that you're in. When I first started playing, I don't know what's going on. So the more I play it, the more I feel like I can improvise and be active in it.
It's interesting too, because you mentioned that at first, the technical thing is having like a lot swimming in your head, difficult to kind of find your character. That actually seems like, from the interviews I've seen of like other improvisers, that stuff can happen too. Like for people that are just starting out, it's like if they're doing a specific game, right? That often, like they'll be overly concerned with the rules of the game,
right,
and they can't just give themselves over to the comedy of it, or whatever, right?
There's a thing that we shot and it hasn't come out yet, but maybe there's a little bit online called HarmonQuest. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen it.
We took Spencer, Dan Harmon, Aaron McGathy, and like celebrity guests like Danny Pudi and Chris Hardwick and Brian Posehn and Patton Oswalt and some other people.
All the all-stars.
Blake, what's his name, from Anderson, from Workaholics? The guy with the crazy hair.
Okay, yes.
Yeah,
of course, yeah.
Is it Blake Anderson? Anyway,
I think so.
Yeah, he's wonderful. We sat down at Cinefamily, a live theater in Hollywood, and sat up in a big dais and played a Pathfinder round. And then we sent it to animators, and they animated it. And it's really funny. And in that one, we're really improvising. We're really having fun with it.
Just going for it.
So, because you have great comedians on stage, and in that one, we all felt very free to like riff and make the world funny, so.
Yeah, it might be rare, because so many improv games, other than on the spot, I guess, so many improv games are so fast, right? Like they're like a couple minutes sometimes, whereas like a D&D session can last, I mean, if you want it to, it can last for like 6 hours, right?
I wish that like when we played our game, it was kind of short-lived. It was hard to get everybody together, and I think that's usually the crisis with a D&D game.
Any D&D game,
keeping everybody together. And Spencer, our game master, was like, he put so much work into creating the maps and the possibilities, and then nobody shows up. Yeah. If Dan and I had our way, we would play for 6-8 hours, and order 9 pizzas and just like make a whole thing out of it. Yeah. And sadly, when we do it on Harmontown, we only play for a half hour tops.
It's one segment of a larger variety show.
Yeah, and Dan's in a blackout drunk, and so next week we have no idea what happened.
What happened? Yeah. Well, that's entertaining too, and that's also a lot like a lot of D&D games.
Yeah.
You do not remember.
Did you ever hear Dan and Rob Schraub's old comedy group, the Dead Alewives? I don't know if you can find it, but they did a thing called D&D.
Oh, really?
And it was on Dr. Demento. If you guys can find that. If Dead Alewives, which
Dead Alewives.
That's one word. It's kind of a fish.
Yeah.
And find the D&D thing. It was on Dr. Demento a lot. It's really fun.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, that's. I mean, Dan has a history going back forever, and you do too. I mean, you were like a child star for a long time. You've been around for a long time.
I did a lot of theater and commercials as a kid. I was on Broadway when I was like 10 and stuff.
So this is a bit of a random question, but it seems like, to a certain extent, like you're an improviser, you're a comedian. This will be a weird question, but does that help with, because a lot of people can get burned out of show business, right? Especially like people that start as children, even in theater, whatever. Like it can be really hard to sustain enthusiasm. Do you think that improv actually kind of helps with that?
Oh, absolutely. Like I acted as a kid and then stopped when I was about like 13. I stopped doing it, and then I acted a bit in high school. And my friend Matt Gorley, who is on the incredibly funny podcast Super Ego, which is one of the best ones out there. We were best friends in 7th grade, and in the senior year of high school in Whittier, California, he dragged me into this improv thing called Comedy Sports, and they were teaching high school kids how to play it. And it was terrifying, and then we ended up doing a bit in college, and then we got asked to be in the professional, like adult, real show. We started doing that live show, and I didn't want to act. I was going to college, and I was studying business, and then I dropped out of that because I suck at math. So I was a journalism major, and I had no intention of acting ever again. But I was doing this improv show once in a while, just for fun. Yeah. And it was improv that made me realize, no, this is all I want to do. All I want to do is be on stage and try to make people laugh. Yeah. And we are adults now. We feel like kids. We refer to ourselves as professional fifth graders, because all we do is goof off. And I would never stop doing that. It's really great. And also, like, we call what we do in Whose Line games. We don't call them sketches or bits or skits or whatever. Everything is a game. And when you play a game, you're finding what the rules of the game are in that thing that you're making up. So all we do is play games for a living.